Welcome to the Faith and Business Podcast. I'm your host, Elle Edwards, mental health champion, positive psychology geek, and founder of the Faith and Business Playground. Join me each week as I talk openly about mental health, the dark side of entrepreneurism, and bring you Bible-friendly tools, support, and resources to help you heal from depression so you can actually be as happy as you think you should be. In today's episode of the podcast, we are thinking about what we say and mean versus what someone else hears. And this works the other way too, of course, what other people say and mean versus what we actually hear. Now, this ties in with what we talked about in the Mindset Minute, because as you'll have heard, if you've heard that already, you'll have heard me remind you that your brain literally changes the way that you see the world by what it chooses to filter in. And there's some really fascinating science experiments. The famous one is the one where people were encouraged to watch this video. I think it was a video of a basketball game. And they were told, right, keep track of how many times the green team touched the ball, for example. I can't remember exactly what they were asked to do, but it was something like that. And at the end of the time, the people came up with an answer. And then the experimenter said, what about the man in the great big gorilla suit? And they were like, what man in the gorilla suit? And they literally did not see, when they watched it back and they were shown the clip again, there was indeed a man in a gorilla suit waving, woohoo, hello, look at me. They didn't see him. They were focused on keeping count of the number of the times the green team touched the ball. They literally did not see the man in the gorilla suit because their brain filtered it out. The man in the gorilla suit was not important to what they needed at that moment. He was filtered out. They literally didn't see him. So when I say that our brains literally change what we see, that's what I mean. Literally. So your experience of this world is filtered by your brain. Added to that, of course, is the nuance of language and conversation. And so one of the frustrations as we do this mental health work is that I think church as an institution is generally doing a better job of addressing our mental health. I still have issues with the phrase issue, as you'll have heard me say a couple of weeks ago. It's not a mental health issue. If you're human, you have a mental health issue. We all have to look after our mental health. It's not an issue like, some secret label. But leaving that aside, so the conversation has moved on. In the olden days, historically, it would have been considered, okay, well, if you have mental health issues, then there must be sin in your life, or it's a demonic attack, or, we've moved on from there. It's got a little bit more grown up and nuanced. However, there are still things that are being said, probably with the best of intentions, but things that are being said that aren't helpful. And so I just wanted to bring some of these expressions that we hear sometimes, just shine a bit of a light on them. And for two reasons. Reason number one, the biggest reason, is if you have come across or have been subjected to some of these well-meaning but really not helpful expressions, I want to encourage you to think again and to please don't believe that every single church and every single Jesus person believes that too. But the flip side of that as well is I want you to make you aware of it so that you, all being well, don't fall into the trap of accidentally, well-meaningly saying things that actually cause more hurt. So one of the biggest ones, for example, is this idea of trust. So if you trust, as you learn to trust God more, you'll find that your depression will melt away. Have you ever heard that one? Have you been subjected to that well-meaning but really not very helpful expression? If you have, on behalf of the person that said it, I'm sorry, but it's just not true. You say to someone, if you trust God more, as you learn to trust God more, your depression will melt away. What we hear is, my depression is because I don't trust God enough. It will disappear as I get deeper in my faith. And that's not necessarily the case. It's not the case at all that it's not because of enough trust, but it's not the case that it will necessarily just melt away. You will have good days and bad days. And if you're somebody who struggles with anxiety, for example, for whatever reason, whatever triggered it, whatever started it, because none of us generally are born with anxiety. As babies, we don't have it. The predisposition might always have been there, but in my experience, something happens to like switch it on, for want of a better expression. So regardless of what switched it on, it will probably be something that you will have to deal with for the rest of your life. You will have I know that, okay, if you're sitting there going, no, I don't want to have to deal with this. If you're having a bad day, remember though, there will be good days and bad days. There will be good periods and less easy periods. There'll be times where you're going along quite nicely, everything's great, and all of a sudden, bam, something hits you and it sends you on a spiral. But you don't have to, you're not going to be stuck in that, those really bad days when things are awful. Those days you won't always be stuck in those days for always. And that's one of the dangers, of course, is that when you're right down at that point, you feel like it's going to last forever. You feel it will never, ever end. You're always going to feel like that. I want to remind you, the more often that you go through this cycle, and I do see it as a cycle, and sometimes it can be a really big circle, and sometimes it will cycle around quite quickly, but I do see this as a cycle. And the nice thing is, the more times you go around this cycle, the more evidence that you've got for yourself that it will pass. And so I do this with my daughter and my husband, both of them. If they're having, when they're having a good time, we enjoy the good times. If they go around when they go around the cycle and they have not such a great time, and then it feels like it will last forever, I purposely remind them, remember, you felt like this last time. And so for you, ideally, I would love you to have someone alongside you who can remind you that those days when it feels rotten aren't going to carry on forever and ever and ever. You will have better days because you've got the evidence of that. But having well-meaning but really not helpful people saying, oh, just trust God more. No, that's hurtful, because there are people who trust God really deeply and really implicitly, and they still suffer with anxiety or depression or whatever, a mental health problem of some kind. It's not linked. It's not, you don't need to do more, trust more, be more, whatever more in order to get rid of it. It will fluctuate. It will need management. It might need medication. It might need talking. It might need a range of different strategies, but it's not directly linked to how much or how little you trust God. The other one that you might have heard from time to time, two of my favorite examples, my very favorite, we've talked about this in previous episodes of the podcast, Elijah, the suicidal prophet, as I call him. And so he did go through a period where he was really, depressed. It wouldn't have been medically diagnosed because it was different times. And Job is another one as well. He wrote some real heart-wrenching stuff. David too. But let's take Elijah by way of example. And you'll say, oh yes, lots of, Elijah was depressed. He really struggled. But you need to remember, he didn't pander to it. He didn't give in to it. He just got on with what God told him to do. And when someone says that to you, what you might hear is, oh, I'm just being selfish and self-indulgent, and I need to just ignore how I'm feeling and just push on with what God tells me to do. No, that's not helpful. I think the reason why the stories of people like Elijah and Job and some of David's Psalms are in the Bible are to remind us that God knows that we will feel like this. And if you remember the Elijah story, like I talked about in that, if you've heard that episode, remember how God came to Elijah. So God sent his angel, and the angel fed him, gave him nourishment. He didn't give him stuff to do. He didn't send him on a task. He gave him rest and food, and then he fell asleep again. And then gave him more rest and more food. And then he journeyed. But then when God came to speak to him, God wasn't in the fire or the hurricane or the earthquake and all the big stuff. God was in the gentle whisper, because that was what Elijah needed. And so God knows what you need as well. And God doesn't need you to push away how you're feeling. God doesn't need you to pretend that everything's okay. Ideally, God will send people alongside you to be those angels. And you by turn will be that angel for other people as well. It's why we do community. But it's not self-indulgent or selfish to express how you're feeling. You don't just have to buck up and get on with it. You can be you, and God gives us very clear examples of the Bible of how much he wants to come alongside you and comfort you, and will send people to do that too. Another one, moving on, another one I really don't like. Oh, and I also should at this point mention a big thank you to, if you're not come across them, Mind and Soul Foundation. They do some great work in the mental health and church conversations. And so this podcast episode is based on an article I read on their website. So big shout out to them as well, because they're doing some really good work, while I remember. But another one that you might have come across is, oh, we all have our own cross to bear. Your cross might be mental health issues, but don't worry, in heaven there'll be no more tears, there'll be no more gnashing of teeth. How depressing is that? If you didn't already have depression, that would send you down the other way. Because what I hear, and I hear that, it's like, oh, I am never going to get better until I get to heaven. I am going to feel this rotten and this awful forever. There's no point carrying on. God made me like this. God gave me mental illness, and I am never going to get better until I get to heaven. And that's not helpful, and that's not true. And God doesn't will you to have the struggles that you're struggling with right now. I mean, sometimes, yes, we are, we're talking, there's the suffering of Jesus, and we are called to carry our cross and all that sort of stuff. But God didn't will that stuff to happen, and they're not fixed in place. And if you're having a bad day, like we've already talked about, that bad day won't last forever. There will be good days and bad days. So this idea that it's a personal cross you just got to bear, no, it's really not helpful. And no, just don't do it. The other one that really, really does my head in is the one where we talk about people. They've moved on from saying it's, mental health is a demonic attack and things. But, you might have heard this expression. I'm actually quoting directly off from Mind and Soul Foundation for this one. The enemy is using mental health issues to make the church inward looking. As long as we're being introspective, we are losing our effectiveness in mission. What I hear when I read that is, what I hear is the underlying tone is, okay, mental health, Satan, the devil, is using mental health as a weapon, and using it to stop people from being more loving for Jesus. And while I talk about my mental health issues, I'm undermining the stuff that Jesus can do. And that's not true at all. Actually, the struggles that you deal with, the things, your good days and your bad days, when you have those conversations, you know what actually happens is that you help people feel less alone. You help people be seen. You help people realize it's not just them. So I would say the opposite is true. I would say that, I would encourage you to have those conversations. Our brains filter in stuff. And so I don't want you to sit in those feelings forever. Ideally, I want you to feel them and talk about them and deal with those feelings. And then with support and encouragement, move through the cycle onto the better days. I don't want you to stay stuck in those feelings. That's not healthy for you either. But to deny it and refuse to talk about it isn't healthy and isn't helpful either. So really, this is about you showing up and being you, the real you, made, warts and quirks and foibles and all of them. The stuff that goes on in your head is part of who you are. Being kind to yourself on the good days and the bad days is part of who you are. And you're not, the devil isn't using that as a weapon to beat you or to stop you from being a Christian. It just is what it is. In the same way, if you had a broken leg and we'd fix your broken leg, using proper medical intervention and the best practice at the time. The same is true about mental health as well, which leads me on to another one, actually. This idea that we should avoid medicating for mental health problems. it's still seen as a crutch, and it's still seen as a last resort, and it's still seen as but we should eventually get off this. But if you're diabetic, you take insulin every day, twice a day. I don't know enough about insulin to know. There are medications that we take daily. I take a contraceptive pill every day so I don't have any more children, because I've got 3 lovely children and my family is complete now. You might, if you have a heart condition, you might take blood thinners, or if there's a physical ailment in your body and you are given medicine to make that ailment better, or to prevent it from getting worse, we don't question it. One of my nephews he's only got like 3/4 of a kidney, and he's been on antibiotics almost from the day he was born, I believe. Like, he's on antibiotics every single day because they don't want him to get a kidney infection in the bit of kidney he's got left. We don't go, oh, well, we should wean him off that eventually, because if his body was, God will heal and God will make it better, so you don't need it. It's a crutch. No, we don't say that about physical stuff. So why should we say that about the stuff that's going on between our ears? We don't need to. There are people who are naturally lower in serotonin, and the way I see it is that some of these medicines, they help increase people's serotonin levels, and that's an actual medical need. And so seeing medication as a last resort or a weak proposition isn't helpful, isn't healthy. And if you need medication and have been subjected to this idea that by being on medication you're less somehow or weaker somehow, I want to remind you that's not true. We take medicine every day for physical ailments. There are people that need medicine every day for what goes on between their ears. There's no difference in my mind, and there shouldn't be any difference in our church communities either. Okay. Final one is this idea of healing. You may already have prayed for God to remove or to help you with how you're feeling. And he can help you, and he will help you. And there'll be days when, the struggles and the stuff that goes on between your head, in your ears, and what's going on in your head might draw you into talking to him more. And, you might feel, oh yeah, I've been healed. But then some really well-meaning person in the church will say to you, you've been healed of your mental health problem. You've got to agree with the healing so you can receive it. What? Come on, really? No. This idea of, it just drives me crazy. And this isn't actually just unique to mental health healing as well. I mean, there's a lady in our church who has been to these laying on of hands, healing things. And I'm not saying that these things don't happen, but the message that she stepped away with was that she wasn't healed of her physical ailment because she didn't trust God enough, or because there was some sin in her life, or there was something wrong with her, and that's the reason why she wasn't healed. That is, I nearly said a rude word then, very damaging and not very helpful at all. Balderdash. This podcast is listed on iTunes as being clean. So, and I'm not much of a swearer, but I do get a little bit cross sometimes, and it just slips out. Then, because it's absolute nonsense. It's balderdash. It's bollocks, as I wanted to say. It's really just not true. And the sooner we can stop peddling this myth that someone isn't healed because they don't trust enough, or there's some sin in their life, the sooner we can start healing our churches and stop hurting people. I only have a very vague memory, but when I was a child, and my mum and dad will know this story better than they can tell it better than I, but there was a child in the church at the time who had leukemia, and she was dying, and she was burning up in the night, and her parents were called and rushed to her bedside. She was healed. She woke up the next morning and she was better. The leukemia was all gone. She was a child. She didn't trust God enough, or got rid of enough sin, or done any of these things that the healing pros tell us we have to do or be or whatever. She was just a kid. It happened for whatever reason, but she was a child. And so there was nothing in her. There's nothing that she could do or be or any of that sort of stuff to make that thing happen. It happened. And so those conversations around healing, both physical ailments and mental health ailments, no, it has to stop, because it really just is damaging. It's not helpful at all. So, which leads me on, of course, to my invitation to you. If you're not already a member of the Faith and Business Playground, as you may have gathered already from my Boulder Dash comment, I want to help be a part of the conversation where we enrich people and we stop giving people a hard time for how they're feeling. And I am building a community of like-minded folk. So if that feels like something that would be helpful to you, I would encourage you to come and join us. faithandbusinessplayground.com/join. If you're already a member, woohoo, hooray. But yeah, it has to stop. It's not helpful. It's damaging and it's hurting people. Maybe it's hurt you. And if it has hurt you, I'm sorry on behalf of the person or the institution that said those hurtful things. We're not all like that, I promise. Okay. Anyway, I feel quite riled up now. Just why I took a deep breath to try and calm myself. As ever, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. If you would like to talk about this more and go deeper with this stuff, the Faith and Business Playground is the place for that. We can have these conversations. And if there have been things that have hurt you and you just want to rant about it, get it out of your system in a safe space. Again, the Faith and Business Playground is for that. faithandbusinessplayground.com/join. But in the meantime, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. It's been my absolute pleasure to share this with you, and I shall catch up with you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.